Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scot McKay.
Hello, gentlemen, and welcome again to yet another episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. My name is Scot McKay. At Scot McKay on Twitter, on Truth Social, and on TikTok. You can also find me at Real Scot McKay on Instagram. You can find me on YouTube by searching my name, SCOTMCKAY. The website is mountaintoppodcast.com, as always. And if you are not a part of the Facebook group just yet, gentlemen, you got to join. We're having a lot of fun over there. Probably not what you're expecting. It is not yet another one of those men's Facebook groups where everybody complains about their relationships. We have a lot of fun. We admire women. We are talking about being better men to get better women into our lives. All that good stuff is happening at the Mountaintop Summit on Facebook. Today, we are going to cover a topic that traipses into an area where angels fear to tread. Heck, I believe the devil himself may fear treading into this neck of the woods. We're going to be talking about fetishes. And with me today is a board-certified expert on applied behavioral analysis, and we're going to find out what that means real shortly. She is coming from a beautiful part of California, just a little bit south of Santa Barbara, and her name is Laurie Singer. And Laurie, I want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you, Scott. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, likewise, because after 310 plus episodes of this show, we've never really had a guest who chooses to talk specifically about fetishes. Now, as a therapist and working with clients all day long in the mental health profession, you, of course, see all sorts of people with all sorts of different things going on in their lives. But you indeed wrote a book called You're Not Crazy, Living with Anxiety, Obsessions, and Fetishes. And today we're going to talk about that latter aspect of fetishes and maybe a little bit about the obsessions too. We might mix in a few of those just for good measure. Sounds like fun. I think the actual beginning of that title is very telling. You're Not Crazy. So tell us a little bit about the book and why you wrote it.
So the book, the title is You're Not Crazy, Living With, because you have to learn how to live with what you have, whether it's an obsession about something or fetishes. It creates a lot of anxiety and it could create trouble in your relationship. So I try to get the individuals I work with, how can you live with what you have so that you're not getting arrested, so you're able to develop relationships, so that you're not engaging in anything that's self-harmful. So that's why I chose the title of the book, and I wanted to write it. I wanted to write it for years, but, it's taking the time to get to do something. I've had a lot of psychologists, doctors, and other clinicians and professionals in the area that have sent clients to me over the years for a number of different reasons. And they all said, Laurie, what you do really works. You really should write a book. So finally, I like setting goals for myself. And so when I turned 60 a few years ago, I decided to write the book.
Man, if I had a nickel for every time one of my friends said, wow, what you're doing really works, you should write a book. Well, I'd probably have at least $2.25 by now. But nonetheless, I heard that a lot back when I was learning how to attract women better, and I was in turn attracting better women into my life than most of my friends had seen me with before. Even some of the women I had been dating were saying to me, you should write a book on this because most guys are clueless. So I definitely know where that sentiment comes from and how inspiring it can be to get you to write that book. Now, what I noticed when you were talking about the subject matter you wrote about, Laurie, is there's kind of a bit of a dichotomy there. Okay, on one hand, you're not crazy, but on the other hand, correct me if I'm wrong, you made it sound almost like this is a chronic condition that needs to be managed. My obsessions, my fetishes. As I think about it, the word anxiety is kind of an odd bedfellow juxtaposed next to obsessions and fetishes. Because we all know anxiety is something we probably should club over the head with a shovel until it stops twitching. I mean, it's no fun to live with anxiety.
I know.
But if you're obsessed about something, that can be a happy obsession. And if you have a fetish towards something, I mean, a lot of people don't really know what that even means, the word fetish. I mean, it seems like it's stigmatized, but on the other hand, I mean, there are guys out there who think women's feet are sexy, and someone drops the F word on them to describe it, and they're thinking like, well, I don't think I'm the only guy out there who feels that way. So help us dig a little deeper into this idea of, I'm not crazy, but if I have an obsession or a fetish, I kind of need to do the right thing with it.
Okay, so if we want to start with, I can go back to where, anxiety and shame might have been involved. So when an individual was, let's say, we're going to say a male, was younger. And
you can say a male. We're all mostly males listening to this, so it's perfectly okay.
So the male is experiencing maybe their first orgasm, right? Let's say, God, I could use so many examples. I'm not quite sure which one to use. I guess I'll use the one, well, do you want me to use the one with the dirty diapers, or should I go for something else?
Not if it's an orgasm.
Okay.
No, I'm kidding.
Okay.
You're going to have to get used to my sense of humor, Laurie. We don't know each other very well. I'm not being serious.
I'll tell you what happens is, guys are younger, so they're masturbating in the bathroom, and there happens to be, they have a sibling who's maybe 2 years old, and they're using diapers. So the diapers get thrown away in the bathroom. They ejaculate. Their orgasm is then paired with their dirty diaper. And now we have somebody who is becoming sexually aroused from either the smell or the sight of a dirty diaper. They end up going to school and they're getting in trouble because they're staying in the bathroom too long. Do you see where I'm going with this, Scott? It becomes unhealthy. They're lingering by the trash cans outside their apartment building.
They're anchoring their sexual pleasure to something
Correct.
that is atypical to anchor one's sexual pleasure to.
Right. So now they have this irrational thought because their orgasm was paired with the dirty diaper. So now they have this irrational thought in their head that they can only become aroused if they are around something like that. So we have to try to make them, or try to get them to experience sexual pleasure or become, I guess, become excited sexually through something other than a dirty diaper, because it's gotten in the way of them leading a healthy life, really.
All right. I'm crystal clear on that now. And traveling back in time a couple minutes, I now realize why you sort of froze up when I cracked the joke about only if it doesn't involve an orgasm, because you're so deep into the crazy world of fetishes and whatever that it literally was about to be those two ideas in the same thought. So I stand corrected. I got to be careful where I joke, because after all, this is a place where angels fear to tread, and podcast hosts probably should fear treading on that hallowed ground a little bit too. But that is really interesting because indeed, it opens the door to almost limitless combinations. Well, truly limitless combinations of where people's unique obsessions may find them. Doesn't
right. And also too, Scott, an individual may not even realize up to a point that it becomes a deviant behavior. Scott, that's where we have a problem. And trying to figure out where it kind of started and how do we go from there to make it more healthy. And they can achieve an orgasm and an erection in a different way. It doesn't have to be the other way. So that's kind of where the cognitive behavioral and behavioral therapy part of it come in.
I love how that was second person singular. Scott, we can talk about your behavioral problem here. You still have that therapist hat on. I feel like, I should just lie down on the couch exposing all my most vulnerable bits and pieces of my sexual deviancy. So you are board certified on applied behavioral analysis.
Correct.
So based on where this show has gone so far, I'm thinking applied behavioral analysis is long and fancy for why do I do what I'm doing and should I be doing it? Am I onto something? Is that about it?
Yeah, the applied behavioral analysis likes to look at things more objectively. It's more of a science. It's not the, sit on the couch, and it's more data driven and trying to get to the facts and solution focused. If that makes sense to you.
Well, I'm familiar with solutions focused brief therapy, which is not unlike coaching. Similar?
Right. Yeah, it's a systematic way to modify your behavior. So in my book and what I have with my clients is I have them take data on their behavior. So I would sit with you and I would get a history of what you're coming in for. And as I mentioned to you earlier, a lot of times people will think that they're the worst case. Am I the worst case you've ever seen? And I think to myself, if you only knew the people that I've talked with know you are not the worst case. So it's called ABC data, antecedent, behavior, and consequence. So if we were to use the dirty diaper situation, the antecedent would be, I got the urge to pleasure myself. And the behavior was, I went to a dumpster by a preschool and looked in the trash can and masturbated. And then what was the consequence? A policeman was driving by and I was arrested. I mean, that would be ABC data at the extreme, but I would get an idea of what's happening just before the behavior, what the behavior looks like, and what's a consequence. It could be that the police don't come by, but they experience shame and they're just feeling hopeless about themselves because they're engaging in this behavior and they know that it's not right.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's like a whole Reddit subgroup for people who masturbate to dirty diapers.
I mean, sure there is.
It's a big world out there. I wouldn't be surprised.
It is a big world.
So on one hand, you may feel as if you have this deviant sexual fetish, and yet it seems to be even more relevant what you're doing with that fetish, especially to the extent that it would hurt other people or offend people in public.
Right, because remember now you're engaging in a behavior in public, and it's by preschool. So I mean, I'm just throwing this out there. I'm not saying that it happened. I'm just saying that it could happen, or you could be at your job site and you get fired from your job. And it doesn't have to be to that extreme. I've had other cases where an individual who had just turned 18 and I finally discovered what was happening was he was putting on this rash guard where you go surfing, rash guard, and then he would put gel all over his body. And he would light a candle. And it was very ritualistic for him to masturbate and to achieve orgasm. But he was so ashamed of it until he moved out of his house. And then he was able to, kind of explore it further. But unfortunately, he was lingering by the washer and dryers of the apartment building, and people got upset and it was getting out of hand. So we had to work a way where he was still able to engage in what he thought that he needed, but in a way where he wasn't exhibiting any deviant behavior. And he was actually very relieved because he did find different sites and people like himself that like to do similar things. So it normalized the situation for him and he wasn't feeling shame any longer. So that was a good thing.
Yeah, I was going to say the bright side there is, exactly when you found your soulmate.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, that can't be all terrible, can it?
No.
As you're talking, one of the themes that keeps coming up is this lingering around. And I remember when I was a kid, there was this guy who kind of just hung around. He would just sort of be lingering, and it creeped the hell out of everybody. And he wasn't doing anything but standing there. So what immediately came to mind is anybody who's lingering around in general is already creepy. And if they're doing something creepy consistently while they're lingering around, that just 2X's it. And if they're doing it in front of a preschool, well, then you've just basically pegged the trigger on the creepiness Richter scale. So
yes,
a word to the
you've
wise
checked
there.
all the boxes. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So, and I have to say though, a lot of the times if they're willing to change, the problem is that you can continue with the behavior as long as you don't get caught, I believe. And then once you get caught is when it brings that more shame in, and the people around you get very concerned and they want to help you. And you can navigate through that to where you're not going by the preschool. You're not getting fired from your job. You're able to satisfy yourself, but you're not hurting yourself or other people. And that's really what it's all about.
Well, I would say there's an extent to where that has a limit too. I mean, if the police raid your house and find a bunch of kiddie porn on your hard drive, that may have happened totally in private, but it's still illegal.
No,
and
that
it's still
is
a
horrible.
no-no.
Yeah, that's not good. No. And then you have, some of my clients that I get have not yet acted on anything, but they have that cognitive thought going on in their mind. And so we try to change that, that's a tough one. It's a tough one.
Well, yeah, I mean, and also if your fetishes and obsessions bring violence into the picture, then you're going to start triggering a bunch of these new red flag laws, aren't you?
Yes, that's a whole, there's so many different types. And some other partner, it could be male on male, female, heterosexual, I don't know, whatever other people are into. It doesn't matter. The violence is not good, no matter how you look at it. That's what I believe. Also, another thing, the self-injurious behavior. I had a young man come to see me, his parents, they called me in because he was giving himself wedgies to the point where it was creating, damage to himself. And this was sexual gratification for him, were the wedgies. And so, one of the problems was that it's funny because the dad was a real macho guy. And I said, well, have you ever sat down with your son and talked about masturbation and how he can gratify himself? And, oh, no, but we'll get into it. And I said, well, I have this great book. And why don't I give you this book? And it kind of goes step by step. And he said, okay, sure. Never did it. And I said, then the wife and I sat down and I said, I'm just going to read the book out loud, the chapter that I think would be very helpful. And the young man was sitting next to me and I read it out loud and he was able to absorb what I was saying. And he actually learned how to masturbate and he wasn't using that, giving himself wedgies anymore, which was a good thing. Of course, he did it on his own, not in front of us, thank God. But it's a whole learning experience. Once you've achieved that sexual gratification, you've got to get it in a healthier way. If you don't, then you can't replace it with anything.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I can see how people could come up with some very unique habitual rituals based on how they masturbate or how they get off sexually, because that's how it happened the first time, and then the second time, then the third time, and they're kind of in that rut. I can understand that.
Yeah, and that's a difference between, somebody having to, masturbate to a pair of tennis shoes and then having 200 pairs of tennis shoes in their bedroom versus wanting your partner to get dressed up in a different outfit.
For sure.
There's a distinction.
Yeah, no, I can understand that completely. And it's simply a matter of how common this connection is that's being made between the sense of the sexually erotic and the behavior that goes along with it. Like, I don't think anybody would think it's really abnormal to masturbate to pictures of women in French maid outfits because, well, a lot of people find that sexually erotic and they came by it from a natural course of events. Obviously, anything to excess is still a problem, but I will go on record and say my wife has a really cute little French maid outfit that she likes to put on when the kids aren't around. And it's kind of nice, actually.
Yeah.
And she's playing along, So a couple of things there. First of all, you talked about this really macho dad who was so macho he hadn't talked to his kid about the birds and the bees yet. I did that with my kid when he was 10, with my son. And some people thought that was a little young, but I did catch him before the rest of the culture he surrounded himself with did. And that was a net positive. And my son is very well adjusted, I would say, in terms of all things sexual and how to deal with women and how to be good to women and respect them. He also gets, if I may say so myself, a pretty good example of that around the house. So I wrote down the outline of everything I taught my son in the order that I taught it. And I have it all ready to go. It's in the can. And I floated that by my audience to see how much interest there was in it. And the same exact group of guys who constantly bemoan that their dads never taught them anything are showing virtually no interest in it.
I know.
They are saying, man, I wish my dad would have had the balls to teach me this stuff. But then they're demonstrating they don't have the balls either. And I think that really leads us to a place here in our culture where there's no rite of passage from boy to man sexually, and boys and girls, frankly, are left to fend for themselves, figuring out what is sexually appropriate to begin with. And you certainly can't count on Pornhub to do that for you.
No, and it's a shame because, so there's so much access through the internet to get misinformation or to think that I get a lot of clients come in and they want to, or they want to become sexually active with their partner, but their expectations are that it's going to look like something on porn on the internet. And they're going to be very disappointed.
Or that their partner will be into diapers.
Yeah. Or something that, so I think that it's so important, the communication between parents. And if a parent can't do it, bring them to somebody that can, because they're going to need to know if you're not able to do it, you should recognize that early on and bring them to either a professional or a friend that you trust to sit with that friend while they're discussing it with them. I mean, something has to happen, because otherwise, I think 10 actually is a good age, because they're probably already exploring themselves anyway to some degree, right? Because it's healthy.
Yeah. My daughter's 10 right now, and she looks very young for her age. She's just a tiny little thing like her mother was. And it's Emily's turn to talk to her about this stuff. And she's not stoked. She's still trying to figure out how to do it. And I'm thinking it has to happen. And of course, Emily's a good woman and a professional dating coach like me. And it's still not easy for her to gather it up and talk to my daughter about it.
I think the best way,
Scott,
I think the best way is to look for a good book on the internet and read it with your daughter. Like she reads one chapter or one paragraph, you read a paragraph, take turns and talk about it with them.
That's a good word. Yeah.
I think that's a good way to do it. So I like to swim. I like to do a lot of athletic things, and I was swimming, and because I use my legs so much for running and cycling, I use a buoy between my legs, and there was a 4-year-old girl by the pool. And so I was putting the buoy between my thighs, and she was with her grandfather and grandmother, and she said to me, "Why are you putting that in your vagina?" And the grandparents looked mortified. And I said, "Oh, no, it's just going between my legs right here. See, so I don't have to use them when I swim." But it was so funny because she's learning the right terminology. And she just acted like it was like a hand, "Why are you putting that in your vagina?"
It's all right, Gramps. I do this for a living.
So it was so funny.
It's all good.
It was so funny.
That is funny.
So her parents are teaching her,
right?
Her parents are teaching her very young, at least the right terminology, and not to be afraid to use it. And I think that's important.
Yeah. I don't see a problem with that.
No.
I mean, grooming our children at strip club shows at age 4, I have a problem with.
Yeah.
But teaching children facts as they're socially evolved enough to be able to understand what's going on, I'm all for. Now, here you have the words anxiety, obsessions, and fetishes juxtaposed together, like we said.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been talking a little bit about right and wrong and good versus evil when it comes to anxiety, obsessions, and fetishes. We've already decided anxiety, not good. Obsessions, well, let me put it this way. The word implies that you're doing way too much of this and you need to back the hell off a little bit. So obsessions, probably not so good, although it may not wreck your life the way anxiety probably will. Fetish, however, is a word that, even though it may strike up a bit of uneasiness in a person and conjure a certain mental image, I'm not sure it's a good or a bad concept in and of itself. Is a fetish always a bad thing?
I don't think a fetish has to be a bad thing, as long as it's, like I said, as long as it's not harmful to yourself, if it's not harming another person. I mean, that's, and you're not engaging in any unlawful, deviant behavior, because the fetishes are just so wide open. You think of a shoe fetish versus somebody who's, voyeurism or frauderism or those other fetishes. There's something wrong with that. You can't bump into people and rub up against them with your genitals to get an erection. That's just not okay.
Okay, granted. That's fair. So let me ask this question. Obsessions can cover a wide range of subject matter. Are fetishes always uniquely sexual in nature, by definition?
Are fetishes always sexual? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So there's no such thing as I have a leather car seat fetish unless I'm sexually attracted to leather car seats. I can't just only drive cars that have leather interiors, and I constantly have to surround myself with the leather interior of a car. That's not a fetish.
Right, because you're mixing the OCD. So let me give you an example.
That's an obsession.
Right. So let me give you an example of an OCD individual that this one is in my book, but there was a few changes that were made just so I don't want anybody to recognize anything if they pick up the book that they won't know.
Yeah, if it gets too unique, it's going to die.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. Okay.
But I did have this couple come back in, actually. It was the worst case I'd ever seen. And when you say, OCD can be debilitating, this individual, when I first met this individual, honestly, it was the worst case I've ever seen. And they kept thinking that they were touching their crotch. So they would have their partner watch them throughout the day whenever they were together. Like, did I touch my crotch? No, you didn't. I think I did. I need to wash my hands. Then you go through the ritualistic of washing your hands 20 times. You come back out of the bathroom, but did I really wash my hands? You go back into the bathroom. You come back out. No, I think I just touched my crotch again. So it's this whole horrible, irrational thought process that's going on. And so the OCD can be extremely debilitating, causing anxiety. And to some extent, it's got a weird part of sexual innuendos in it.
I can see that. I'm thinking somewhere this particular individual's mom kept telling them to stop scratching your balls. When they were young.
Might be. Yeah. You never know. I'm telling you, you don't know where it starts.
Yeah. Even the person themselves didn't know where it started.
No, they don't.
Wow. Interesting. So then let's talk about fetishes, of course, because that's what we're focused on in this show. We have a fetish about fetishes right now. We're obsessed with fetishes. And lest my audience become anxious that we haven't covered it yet, let's definitely get down to it. So a fetish is an extreme attachment to whatever this behavior is, right? It's extreme.
Yes.
We can at least cross that item off, right?
Yes.
It isn't necessarily an unusual proclivity. Like, in other words, I think women's shoulder blades are really sexy. That doesn't make me someone who fetishizes women's shoulder blades. I just prefer sexy shoulder blades on women. Correct so far?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. So if an Asian woman is out with a man from another race and says, well, do you really like me as a person, or do you just have an Asian fetish? Is that a fair question?
That's a very interesting question, because she's out, they're just on a date. They're not having sex, but that is very interesting. And is that...
Well, let me tell you why I'm asking, because you're hesitating a little bit.
Yeah, because I'm trying to picture the whole thing, and I'm thinking, well, that's a strange question to ask. But
well, it actually isn't, because I hear a lot of guys who do like Asian women.
Yes.
I think they're very sexy.
Yes.
And they get asked this question by Asian women they go out with. Because apparently Asian women happen across a lot of men who want to date Asian women because they have this thing for their Asianness.
Okay.
Not necessarily for who they are as a person. And oftentimes, so I've been told, the women have gotten into the habit of calling it an Asian fetish, this preference to go out with Asian women. And of course, nobody likes to be objectified, right?
Right.
In any way. So a lot of guys who find Asian women very sexy and actually might even prefer to date them get hit with this question and they don't know how to answer it. But my thought process tends to point towards the idea that just because I'm attracted to Asian women doesn't mean I have a fetish, because the word fetish implies something sexually abnormal. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, and that's what I would say. If I was a male caught in that question, I would say, well, I actually am attracted more to Asian women. I just think that they're beautiful, and there's something about the presence and who you are that I respect, and that's why I want to go out with you.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's a fantastic way to frame that. Another example, as we briefly alluded to before, is feet. More men than most of us think really find women's feet very sexy. And of course, women wear cute little shoes and they get manicures and take care of their feet. So even most women themselves instinctively know there's something sexually attractive, at least potentially, about their feet. Yet that doesn't stop men from coming to me saying, hey, I really think women's feet are sexy. There's something wrong with me. And right after I tell them I agree with them, which I do. My wife has the cutest feet in the world, by the way. And she loves that fact. And she likes the fact that I appreciate her cute little feet. I tell them I hear this all the time. It's not abnormal. It just doesn't seem directly connected to sexuality for most men, right? In other words, if I'm sexually attracted to a woman's body part, it seems plausible and logical. There we go with the logic word associated with men, right? That it's their boobies, their hips, their butt, their vajayjay, or something that's directly tied to sex, even their lips or their eyes, right? Not their feet, not their kneecaps, not their shoulder blades. But the more I talk to men, the more I find general agreement that certain physical features of a woman's body may be very sexy to a much larger cross-section of men than the men who find that feature sexy ever thought. As for another example, actually I can think of several. Some guys really love those little dimples at the bottom of a woman's back. They just think that's really sexy. And then they find themselves thinking, what the hell's wrong with me? This woman's back. I'm like focusing on these dimples on her back. Oh no, a lot of guys find that really sexy. One that I found really interesting when I started doing research on all this stuff is a gap between women's teeth. Women pay thousands of dollars on braces, but there are all these guys who think this little slight gap between a woman's front teeth is really, really sexy. And so a lot of these guys are going around thinking there's something the hell wrong with them. And really what's going on is it just hasn't been discussed. Meanwhile, in the mental health profession, there's an autoerotic ism associated with anything that's considered outside the realm of sticking a penis into a vagina to describe all sorts of people in some clinical fashion, which can leave all of us running around thinking there's something wrong with us. You were talking about things that could theoretically hurt you. The first thing that came to mind back when you were talking about that was autoerotic asphyxiation, which notable people have died of.
Yes.
I mean, certainly that falls under the realm of things that might hurt you. And of course, please don't ask me for the clinical names of all these different sexual preferences and sexual proclivities, but there are clinical names for people who are attracted to dead bodies, people who are attracted to injuries or amputees. And people start thinking, well, my goodness, that feels really weird to me because I'm not someone who finds that sexually attractive. Therefore, that thing that isn't universally sexually attractive to everyone that I find sexually attractive must make me weird also. You follow my train of thought?
Yes.
Even though because it's all under the cover of darkness and rarely ever talked about, no one really knows how many people really like it or not, or are sexually attracted to it or not. I mean, things like feet and so forth. I mean, you can do a simple search on Pornhub and realize there's a whole lot more content out there for people who are interested in that than, say, people who are interested in something that would be considered much more deviant by a large cross-section of people. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Right.
And I think, like what we were talking about before, I think listening to your show helps people normalize things and put it in perspective, because it's the thought that there's something wrong, like even the shoulder blades, for instance. You become hyper-focused on the fact that you find that sexy. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not like you're making your wife, show, you're taking pictures of her shoulder blades and you're downloading them on your phone and you have them plastered all over the wall or whatever it is. But at the same time, and you find that sexy about her, that's great. But it's not the only thing that you need to become, or maybe it is, but that's okay, to become sexually aroused. And somebody else, one of your listeners might find that feet are sexy. So they're attracted to somebody with nice feet. And then it goes from there, where they have an engaging conversation and they find the rest of them that they get along with. I don't see anything wrong with that. But, no. but an individual may become hyper-focused and get the irrational thoughts that there's something wrong with me. I know there's something wrong with me. Why do I keep thinking about their feet? How come I'm always attracted to feet? So there you go with that looping of those thoughts, and how, like you said, it turns into something more than it really is.
There's kind of a little acid test I want to run by you.
Okay.
Let's say I'm the guy who finds the gap in a woman's teeth really sexy.
Okay.
If I'm on a date and we're getting along and we're flirting and there's clear chemistry there and it's looking like there's going to be a second date, on the second date, I may say to her, you know what I find really sexy about you? I just love this little gap in your teeth. Now, it may not be the best example in the world because she may be really self-conscious about it. Okay.
True.
But based on what I know about men and gaps in women's teeth, I will be willing to bet she's heard it before. Okay. So if you know she's not going to be flabbergasted by it in some sort of negative way, you say that, she'll probably go, thank you. I've been told that before. Or the better example is probably the little dimples on her lower back. You know, if you're making love to her for the first time or whatever, and you say, God, I just think the little dimples on your lower back are so sexy. She's not going to run away screaming with blood coming out of her ears. Now, on the other hand, if you're starting to get a little horny together and you confide in her that you think dead bodies are really sexy, she may indeed run out of the room with blood streaming out of her ears. You see? That to me is kind of the acid test for, you know, am I a little bit more in the mainstream than I think I am with my quote unquote fetish? Or am I kind of unique in this and maybe need to find my own little circle of people to hang out with?
My guess is that if somebody is, if they're getting sexual gratification just from the image of a dead body, a corpse or whatever, that they will know early on that it's not typical behavior for sexual gratification and that they've already learned and they're probably feeling shame. And I don't know if they would disclose it on the first or second date, but it's something that if somebody is kind of suffering, and I say suffering because they probably are, how are you going to get your sexual gratification? I don't even want to know, from a dead corpse, unless it's just unless it's just an image. So this is a pretty profound mental health issue that they're going through. And so unless they're already worked through it or they have something that they're working through, I think it probably should be disclosed at some point, because otherwise you're going to carry on this relationship that really you're not being 100% honest with the person. Wouldn't you say that?
Yeah. I mean, what you're saying is in a very friendly way, you're not going to really be relationship material for someone who doesn't agree with you on this or feel the same way you do on this until you work it out.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and if you did talk to that person might say, oh, you know what? I actually know of somebody that is working on a similar issue. And what are you doing to overcome this? Or what have you done to help yourself? And they might be very supportive.
Oh, come on, Laurie. They're going to be out that door. You know it.
I've heard so many.
That's a deviant one. Yeah.
Yes, that is that. And you know what? I have not heard of that one. So nobody has walked in my door yet.
There's a term for it.
I mean, I've heard of it.
Necromancy and all that crazy stuff.
I haven't heard of it face to face yet.
Philia. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Necrophilia is like, sexually attracted to dead bodies.
I haven't had the pleasure of working with somebody with that fetishism yet.
Pleasure.
So, well, I would guess. I don't know.
You do this for a living. You're a professional.
That's right.
Yeah. So let me do this. I think we can kind of throw a blanket over any such fetish that doesn't get a whole lot of social validation unless people are exactly like you, and say, okay, those are problematic.
Okay.
I have a great example of something that I believe is right there in the middle ground, which would be helpful. We had a guest on this very show who talked about spanking in the sexual sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I was being very light about it when I first started the interview with her, but I soon realized I needed to shut up and learn, because she was bringing something very fascinating to the table that after all my years up to that point as a dating coach, I had never encountered before. Spanking was her sexual orientation. She didn't care if you were a guy or a girl or non-binary, as long as you spanked her tail until it was red. And that's how she was orgasmic. That's how she found a mate. And I was fascinated, and I listened respectfully because I really was deeply fascinated by it. And I found she was very credible and very straightforward in talking about what she liked and who she was sexually. And I will tell you, the video version of that podcast episode is by far the most downloaded and commented on one on YouTube. It's not even close, because there are more people who can relate to her and her sexual orientation out there than there is actual material out there in the light of day that talks about it. I mean, you're looking for a great search term that nobody's going to probably fight you on, Google AdWords, spanking is a sexual orientation. I bet you'll have a lot more people searching for it than you would think are out there. And if you think about it, it makes sense. I mean, I was approaching that interview, and you guys can go back and listen to it. I'll put a link to it in the show notes so you can find it easily. I don't remember the exact episode number, but I was approaching it from the first person perspective of, yes, I realize a lot of women like you to whack their tail during sex and find it sexy. And a lot of guys don't believe that till they start putting it to the test, with enthusiastic consent, of course.
Right.
But she goes, oh no, that's not what I'm talking about. And I was like, all right, well, tell me. She said, this is my sexual orientation. And I think that's not particularly evil or deviant. I think it's fascinating and interesting. I don't think any more or less of my guest as a person because she told me that about herself once I found out more about it. So perhaps that particular view towards human sexuality isn't as prevalent as, say, guys thinking women's feet are sexy, but it's certainly a lot more socially acceptable than getting a job at a funeral home and making love to dead people when nobody's watching. So I think that's good for the conversation to acknowledge that just because you think in an interesting or creative or different manner, and perhaps it may be even core to who you are sexually, doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you.
Exactly.
Just like you said in the title of your book, this kind of brings it full circle. You're not crazy. You may be different. You may be creative. You may be unique. You may have even thought of something that few people have thought about yet that's really kind of horny and sexy, but you're not some kind of deviant, bad person, let alone someone who's mentally insane, right?
I think that's great. I really like that you brought that example in, the woman talking about her spanking and how that is an important factor for her to have a good sexual relationship. I mean, that's key for her. And you're right, though. That's as long as she's okay with it and she's not getting dismembered or anything. I don't see, who are we to judge people? We're not. And that's part of her healthy relationship.
And last I checked, she's in a long-term relationship with someone like her.
That's great. That's great. Isn't that wonderful? She found somebody. Gauging
by the comments, she could have found many more. There's a whole lot of people. Well, I'll tell you what. This is a fascinating conversation, and I really think you've been very honest about it. And this has therefore been an episode that I think guys are really going to appreciate.
Well, I hope I was able to answer. It's such a broad topic, and there's just so many different areas in it that it's hard to kind of hone in on one thing.
Oh yeah, I know. And your book covers so many more areas, and I'm sure the guys would love to have you back on the show to talk about some of those other areas of study that are important to you. And I would love to have you back. Would you come back and talk about that? Of course.
Those? Yeah, I had a great time, Scott. I really did. Yeah.
Well, I want to point these guys to your book, Laurie Singer. It's called You're Not Crazy, Living with Anxiety, Obsession, and Fetishes. And you can go to my Amazon influencer page. It looks just like an Amazon storefront. It's like an online library from which you can purchase copies of the books penned by not only Laurie Singer, but other illustrious authors who have been guests on this show as well. But this show is all about Laurie and her book, You're Not Crazy, Living with Anxiety, Obsessions, and Fetishes. So I've put it at the top of the list.
At
Mountaintop. Well, you're welcome. At mountaintoppodcast.com/Amazon. And if you go to mountaintoppodcast.com/Laurie, LAURIE, you will be magically redirected to Laurie Singer's website where you can learn about her work and what she does. And believe me, she covers a whole lot more than the subject matter of today's show. She just happens to cover today's show's subject matter especially well, in my estimation.
Thank
so once
you,
again,
Scott.
You're welcome. And once again, Laurie Singer, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a fantastic show.
I really enjoyed myself. I appreciate you inviting me.
Good. And, well, don't enjoy yourself too much because that might become an obsession or a fetish.
I've been told I have those anyway, so.
I've got mountaintophilia. What's wrong with me? I would say there's a lot wrong with you if you got that fetish. Anyway, gentlemen, if you have not visited mountaintoppodcast.com lately, you certainly don't have to become obsessed with the site or anything. I'm not asking for that. All I'm asking for you to do is merely visit it and check out our sponsors, which include Origin in Maine, Hero Soap, and Keyport. Use the code MOUNTAIN10 to get an additional 10% off if you partake of any of the fine goods from any of our equally fine sponsors. While you're at mountaintop.podcast.com, let me tell you something, guys. The master classes have been a huge hit. We've done 3 of them now. They get bigger every month. More guys getting on board. A lot of you guys grabbing season tickets, which means that the individual tickets to each specific month's masterclass are going to become fewer and farther between because I do have a limit on how many guys can attend. So what do? Click the banner at mountaintoppodcast.com that has masterclass written on it and see what this month's topic is. And while you're there, be sure to get on my calendar, talk to me free for 25 minutes. I tell you guys this every single episode. Some of you guys still have not done it. Every one of you guys who gets on my calendar and talks to me is glad they did afterwards. So go ahead and click that red button at the top right-hand corner of the website and get on my calendar to talk to me for free. You'll talk to me personally about where you are right now, what your goals are in terms of getting the right woman in your life and being the best man you can be going forward. All of that and so much more is there for you at mountaintoppodcast.com. And until I talk to you again real soon, this is Scott McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X&Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.